Donald Hoffman is a professor of cognitive sciences and an author of many books and has done many speeches and talks regarding consciousness. In this interview with Tim Ferriss, he describes how consciousness works and, interestingly, has one of his most important observations removed from the conversation.
So consciousness itself is in some sense always learning about itself. And so perhaps then what we are, what people are, and what cats are, and what dogs are, and what amoebas are, and so forth, is consciousness trying on different headsets, different realities.
It's at this point where Professor Hoffman describes consciousness trying on different virtual realities, but for some reason virtual gets taken out of the conversation. I'll play that part again and allow Mr. Hoffman to finish out his very important point.
Different realities, and exploring, and losing itself. I mean, so this is a very interesting idea that the consciousness chooses to really explore so deeply that it loses itself in the exploration, doesn't even know what it is. It becomes a physicalist. It actually thinks that consciousness isn't fundamental. It goes through the whole bit and then slowly has to wake up. And in so doing, it really explores what it's not and what it is. In some sense, to know what you are, you have to know what you're not. And so on that point of view, the Hoffman icon is simply consciousness taking a perspective on itself, looking at itself through a particular space-time headset, taking a little projection. And from that headset, there was a birth, there was growing strong until your 20s and 30s, and then after your 40s, you start declining, and in your 80s and 90s, you die. And that whole process is just consciousness exploring itself from a particular perspective, in which case maybe the Hoffman icon and maybe a lot of stuff can be left behind, but in some sense consciousness itself has learned something through that experience, and the 8 billion other people and the quadrillions of amoebas and the who knows how many viruses and so forth. Consciousness is just trying on innumerable headsets, and when it's done with that headset, it takes it off. And awareness is perfectly fine. The raw awareness is fine, but the detailed icons that happen to appear, space-time icons, objects in space and time, brains, neurons, all those things, those were just icons, and you studied them, and then you realize pretty cool, really, Mount Everest, what a beautiful icon. Death Valley, what a beautiful icon. These are really, but I'm not that. I'm something even more transcendent than space and time. I'm more transcendent than Death Valley. And so consciousness is just waking up.
And here's one more interview Mr. Hoffman had where he describes how life works in the simulation.
So in the model that I'm working on, in which consciousness is fundamental, that model, since it doesn't say consciousness arises from the brain, allows the possibility that death is not the death of the body, is not the death of your consciousness. Think of it this way. Suppose that you're playing, you go to a virtual reality arcade with some friends, and you put on, VR headset and bodysuit, and you're playing virtual volleyball. You see a virtual court and balls, and maybe it's on the beach, see trees and sand and so forth. And you play virtual volleyball for a while, and then one of your friends says, "I'm thirsty, I need a drink," takes off his headset and bodysuit to get a drink, and his avatar collapses in the sand. It's for all purposes in the interface, in the VR interface, it's lifeless. But he's not lifeless. He just stepped out of the interface. And so the idea that space-time is not fundamental, that space-time is doomed, that physical objects are not fundamental, and the idea that consciousness is fundamental leaves open the idea that the death of a person's body is merely the avatar. We're only seeing the avatar in our space-time interface. that has ceased to interact with our interface, but the consciousness can still persist.
Thanks for watching.